Hello there, folks and fellows, and welcome to 522's Shift Happens. If you own a company, chances are you have work that needs to get done, and chances are you need employees who have the skills to get that work done. So what happens if you're lacking those employees? Well, that's where talent acquisition comes into play. Now, how do you acquire said talent? Great question. And we have two guests on the podcast today to answer that question. First off, we have Ron Vassallo, CEO of Kaptivate. He has 30 years of experience in marketing communications, business development, and technology strategy. And he's a leading expert on stakeholder engagement strategies, change management, and community cultivation. And we have our own CEO, Alisa Vossen, with us again. She's a well-known media consultant, creative agent, and brand strategist that focuses on change management and impactful engagement across the NGO and government sectors. So, let's make shift happen. Right. It is fantastic to have you up here. As I said, we are here to talk about talent acquisition. However, if I'm being completely real with you guys, I'm not 100% certain what that is. So maybe Ron, Alisa, one of you can take this. Just tell me what talent acquisition is. Because I remember we had a podcast before about talent recruitment in terms of government stuff, but I don't really know what the difference is between talent recruitment and then talent acquisition.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. In a talent acquisition is really getting after the people, or attracting the people with the right skills, and the right personality and characters, the shared values that allow you to be successful at the work that your organization is having to perform. So it's getting the right, getting that right talent, that right skill set that meets the cultural fit.
And I would also just add that talent acquisition is a long-term strategic play for organizations versus a short-term. So most those in the professional workforce think of recruiting as the only thing they do for hiring and employment of that nature. But that is really hiring somebody for a very specific role that you need right now filled. But in talent acquisition, it's a very long-term strategic play, strategic process, almost like a sales pipeline where you are really networking and looking for the right people for the right seats to make sure that you are constantly filling these important and maybe complex roles that you need. But it's very much a long-term strategic play. And if you haven't started, right, you're already behind the curve because you're now just filling roles that are empty, but you're not thinking about the business holistically in the 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You're only thinking about, I need this job done right now. How can I fill that seat?
Right. It's a good way to kind of understand this, to see it as a jigsaw puzzle where you're fitting one piece into kind of a canvas. Making sure that piece fits into your overall strategy and where you're going as an organization.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get it. In terms of approaching talent acquisition, how would you guys say how do you approach trying to acquire talent and build that long-term sort of employment, I guess, and filling those roles properly with the people that you need?
I don't want to give away the secret sauce. That's why people hire us to do it. Just kidding.
That's fair.
It's very unique to each organization, and it's very unique to each of the business strategies or goals that organizations put into play. How we would do acquisition for a tech company is completely different than how you would do acquisition for an intelligence agency, because the roles are completely different and the workforce is completely different from a personality standpoint to a skill level, all the way down to just lifetime achievements and what people want through the rewards of their life. So it's a very unique strategy. Ron, I don't know if you agree with that, but what I find most rewarding and challenging about talent acquisition and working with clients is that every time we work with a new client, it's a new challenge. And that is us overcoming what their biggest hurdles are. And that's completely different than the last client we worked with.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think it really is. You got to see it as you would, your own customer journey, right? It is a journey. It is a life cycle that you're managing, and it can start as early as exposing folks to the possibilities of your industry or your brand, right? In as early as middle school, right? You could have internships or some kind of education in a high school setting, and that leads into an apprenticeship or a co-op program in post-secondary, right? So it's a real kind of pipeline that you're developing that ultimately is kind of filling that strategic need that you have because you spent time cultivating that candidate over time. That's not always, that's a kind of a best practice, right? Not always the case you find or the place you find yourselves as a brand, but it's certainly the way you have to think about it.
Okay. You actually bring up a really good point because, hackathons in cybersecurity or any type of system engineering, big defense companies are starting early in high school where they're putting on these events, trying to identify early talent and recruiting them early on. So that's actually a really good point. I think, Ron, we see that a lot where we're now, it's not college age, they're actually moving earlier into middle school and high school to attract talent faster.
Yeah, I think to your point on the hackathon, they're using a variety of tools, right? If you're doing sort of more of a transactional recruitment of skills or people, you're going to social media channels. But in reality, there are some interesting opportunities in whether it's hackathon or more broadly sort of crowdsourcing prize challenge, right? We're seeing a lot more employers using, including the government, as a way of identifying folks who really can handle collaborating within teams, are real natural problem solvers, and who can effectively not only collaborate with team members, but can collaborate with competition to kind of see a solution through. And so these new tools that are being used are really kind of, it's the future of how people are going to think of talent acquisition. It's not just the ad. It's more about cultivating the right kind of mindset to help your brand achieve success. And not only your brand, I mean, I can see industry associations getting involved to ensure that the sector, right, is supplied with the right skills and people through these prize challenges.
In terms of so we work a lot with government stuff, obviously. We do some private stuff. I know that Kaptivate and 522 have worked together on a lot of projects and worked together on trying to put together proposals for a lot of projects and things like that. In terms of who is trying to do talent acquisition and trying to accomplish these goals, what are we looking like in the terms of just the landscape, competition and things like that? Just to mention people working with competitors and what is the competition looking like?
To be honest, I think everybody tries to do talent acquisition, but a lot aren't doing it well. And I think it's because you need a team, somebody who's spearheading talent acquisition and understands it from the journey, like Ron talked about. You also need somebody who's not just a recruiter, but you also need the government or the organization or any company to have strategic buy-in to talent acquisition because it is such a long-term goal. And so I feel a lot try to do it. They want to do it. They know it's important. I think resources are limited, and I think a strategic plan is also limited. So I know it's a huge push right now because it's no secret coming out of COVID that folks have changed how they want to be involved in the workforce. They have changed their landscape of their work-life balance and making sure that that is a key benefit for them. And how does that look? Your personal life and your work professional life merging together. So I think we have seen a lot of organizations pivoting their strategy, which is also a very huge challenge when you have to make a major shift in something you thought you were doing really well. And then you're like, crap, I don't want to do this because I didn't know we weren't doing it well. And there's a lot of figuring things out right now that I think is a really great change. We love change for good. So that's why this podcast is Shift Happens. But you can either embrace it or you can hide from it. But if you hide from it, you're going to get kind of left behind. That's my own personal perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's right, because I think it's not it's not really a competition per se that's affecting your ability to acquire the right skills and people to do the job right for your brand. It's more about the contextual changes that are happening that are just dramatic, right? And that now we're seeing in relief because we're in the other side of the pandemic. But you're seeing, if you just go out and are looking for food, right, in your local economy, you're seeing that the hospitality workers just aren't there, right? With the leisure hospitality, you're seeing supply chain issues with transportation. The trucker population is just not what it used to be, as an example. And you're seeing that if you live in our nation's capital, where we are, right? You're seeing that in public sector, and not just in federal jobs. You're seeing, I think it's the number in May of 2023 was that there was a loss of 118,000 teacher jobs across the country. So so that massive gap, and that's happening across the economy, probably has a lot to do with the boomers retiring or certainly coming of age. It probably has a lot to do with the transformation of technology and what that impact and how that impacts roles. But it also has a lot to do with the nature of work. To Alyssa's point, fundamentally changing. Where do I want to live? What's my work-life balance? And the priorities have really shifted from the boomers to Gen Z. And I think all those trends and changes in the economy are it certainly make it more competitive, but largely because these environmental factors are having such a big impact on the workforce and the future of work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so in terms of these changes, these major shifts, because like you said, I mean, COVID is probably one of the biggest. I mean, the COVID hit and everybody was like, I guess we gotta work from home. And then a lot of people were like, actually, this is great. I love working from home. And then that suddenly created this huge expectation, I'm sure, with a lot of companies where it's like, now we've got to allow people to work from home because a lot of people really want to. So in terms of the things that job applicants are looking for in this increasingly ever-changing sort of world, what are we looking at? Like, what are people expecting from companies to be able to provide for them?
I would say, Alyssa, I'll just start and say, I think they're looking for flexibility, right? The idea that they're going to be sort of the salaried men and women of the past, right, who are going to devote their lives to a one company, it's kind of gone. They've got some leverage, right? They know the dynamic in the labor market, but more importantly, the pandemic gave them an opportunity to kind of change the way they live their lives and the role of work within that context. And it's kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle, right? And I think that's the challenge that's ahead. And there are ways to do it, right? To provide that flexibility without breaking the model. But I think employers are going to have to take some risks and going to have to experiment to see that through.
Ron, question, and this may or may not make it into the podcast, but in terms of capacity, do you find generationally a trend that is, the way that our parents worked and was, coming out of the wars, it was feast or famine. And then our generation where it was grow the corporate ladder, you put in the work, you incrementally grow, right? It was harder. We had to do much more. We were fighting. We were scrappy. And then we have another generation that's coming out being like, well, shit, there's way more important things in life than doing, in terms of burning 100 hours a week, I could be doing this and that and having a fulfilled life. Whereas we're like, wait, that was what we were supposed to do. So somebody told us to do it, so we did it. Do you find that those generation gaps that we were talking about earlier in terms of the workforce, harder to manage, harder to kind of entice? And let's be honest, we as middle managers say in our generation, right? It's our job to grow teams. Tell me your perspective of that gap and the different work styles, and how is it a challenge? Is it welcomed? Just across your different expertise and clients that you work with.
No, I think that's true. I think there is a absolute cultural shift in priorities, right? What matters, and I think you're right. If you were kind of raised in the 80s, 90s, you were go, and dedicating a lot of hours to work. And I think that's less important as a priority. And I think employers have needed to basically shift right? Shift because ultimately, like you are trying to sort of attract customers to your brand, you've got to think about attracting talent to your brand. And that means your brand has to mean more than I'm giving you a salary, that you've got some security. They want to see that you're somehow engaged in the issues that matter to them. I think it is a very fraught kind of line to walk, but it's one that you have to, as a company or organization. It's to kind of align with their values. And I think and that's why talent acquisition becomes strategic, because you really are trying to find the people, not just with the skills, but with the values that you share. And that's an interesting dynamic that I think is still going to have to be worked out.
And I think in talent acquisition, correct me if I'm wrong, the interview process is so much longer, right? In order for an organization to dive into that personal connection, you really have to dive into that person and make sure values and reward and skills and everything will all match for that long-term kind of benefit.
Or not. I mean, if it's truly transactional, right? You're just trying to fill that role. You're in hospitality.
That's right.
It's an open door, right? And I think that's a problem, right? And that becomes a tricky game because you're then managing churn.
Yes, which is very expensive.
Which is really expensive. And so, I think hopefully employers are really thinking about this strategically. And as things begin to subside, the post-pandemic world begins to get to a new normal set. But I think a lot of these challenges don't go away because we're still trying to understand what's next. And I think that's the biggest issue. Yeah. And by the way, we talk about this idea of technology changing that the jobs of the future. That's absolutely true. But ironically, we don't have a whole lot of data about the work of the future, or the workforce of the future, or the gaps that exist between the skills that are going to be needed, hard and soft, for the future, and the workforce, that future workforce. What skills do they need, right, or do they have? That big gap is a big unknown, and I think we're going to have to spend time trying to align those two.
There is a lot of course, places needed, but in terms of technology and like how that hard and soft skills and trying to fill those roles and figuring out where to be, I think. Would you say that one of the at least benefits of this sort of these sudden changes, one of the major ones, is that it kind of, in some ways, probably as long as people are very open to it, expands the workforce, because at this point, geographical location probably doesn't matter as much as it once did. A good example here at 522, we have one of our favorite producers, Kara, is up in Boston, and that works out great. She does her job fantastic from Boston. She doesn't need to be down here and in the office every day. And so does that mean that maybe in terms of talent acquisition, places like companies and government can think of expanding beyond their actual geographical locations and maybe look towards spaces where people don't necessarily come into work every day, but they're still able to get their job done because they have the skills needed? Where are you on that sort of thought process, both of you?
I think it goes back to Ron's point earlier about flexibility, and trust also is a key factor. I think a lot of organizations did not trust employees were doing things outside of the working hours, outside of their brick and mortar walls, until they had a shift happen in terms of the pandemic, which allowed everybody to say, oh, okay, everybody can be productive and everybody is adults and can do their jobs just fine. For some organizations with critical roles, those in the government who have to be in lockdown secure facilities, that will never change. And I think, for those that have the flexibility, I think it's a really great opportunity to explore different aspects of your life that you want to see. And if it allows people to go from city to city and explore, that is a reward professionally, and it is a reward personally for that employee. So as long as the company has that flexibility and has the trust with their employees, I am all for it.
I think that's absolutely true. There really needs to be, to enable your organization to be competitive, you're going to have to spend the time to think about having a distributed workforce. And I think that it comes to challenges, no doubt, but it does allow for you to have a much broader pool of talent and probably talent that's kind of enjoying a degree of flexibility that lets them, or rather, gets them to be a little more employer loyal, right? Because it's a pretty significant benefit in their lifestyle. Captivate's been, I would say, has had a distributed workforce well before the pandemic, and so it was not new to us, and it made us a lot more resilient as an organization. We have staff in Seattle and Maine, Florida, and and the Gulf Coast, and so that really has been great. Now the challenges to that are real, in that one, that the potential for that creativity that happens when you're face to face, you kind of have to manage that. So are you having folks travel in? Do you have a budget for that? How do you do that? Do you create nodes in regions? The other problem that we certainly have encountered is that as you bring in junior staff, who's mentoring them? Can they really evolve and build up their skill set and become masters of a particular topical area or skill area as in a distributed kind of workforce? That's tough, and I don't know I have all the answers to that, but I think we're going to need to experiment around that. How can you mentor folks, and how do you deal with that need for junior staff to see a career ladder that's meaningful?
Yeah. I would, also include the cultural challenge that comes with it. Before everybody was in person, those water cooler conversations where the brainstorming, sometimes those big ideas were coming into play, aren't happening. So you have to create a new culture that is inclusive of both remote and in person. And as a creative team, we were all in person before the pandemic. And now, same challenges, we are half in person, half scattered. So you still have the same challenges trying to work through from a creative perspective. And the innovation is something that I think needs to be a true consideration of organizations and where the innovation comes from, because that's how every organization evolves, is bringing together everybody's smart brain and putting them in one room, and that's where the big ideas come from.
To piggyback on that need to kind of cultivate the culture, when you have folks who are distant, you almost have to kind of get into to have some rituals. It seems odd to say, but to have sort of some rites of passage that connect people, that have meaning, and kind of reinforce the values that are near and dear to the group as a whole. That's also an interesting area.
Agreed.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely think that over the course of time, we're going to see a lot of, it's going to come down to, I think, having the time and space of seeing how that kind of spaced out, scattered sort of employee style sort of pans out in terms of data. We have studies that say that people are productive when they work from home, at least in a lot of places. But, you're right in that, like, when it comes to things like mentoring, like more junior sort of members of your staff, maybe they don't learn as well from a distance, because you can't really have those water cooler talks where somebody goes like, oh, by the way, this thing and that thing and that thing. And like, it has to be a formal meeting. You have to kind of put a meeting on the books, which is a very different sort of vibe, which is very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot to be seen, I think, over the course of the next few years. That's why I definitely probably prefer like in-person stuff, just for that kind of reason, just because I'm young and learning stuff. And so it's easier for me to learn things from Alisa and Chad and Kyle and etc. if I'm working with them face to face and asking those questions just right in the moment.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I think why video to get at media. Video is a powerful tool in talent acquisition, because it allows you to tell a story that's powerful, humanizing, really evocative, in a way that I don't think any of the media really does effectively. And so, in a world where we are distributed, video kind of is a way of tying things together, right? In a way that I think adds a lot of meaning that I think is unique. So I think that there's an interesting space for video into talent acquisition strategy.
Absolutely.
I was going to say one trend that we see in talent acquisition is personalization. Organizations are personalizing their growth patterns in terms of career tracks so that they can show an applicant a day in the life of a career at their organization so that they can see themselves in that role, and then they're automatically immersed. So it's an immersive tool now that's emotional and humanizing and personal to each person. So if you can see somebody doing the job that you want to do, that is a higher conversion rate for you than if you were just to be like, this is a civil engineer job in the government and you do XYZ, here's your job description. That's very disconnected now. And so, but if you see some similar employee of your age range outside doing the work that you're doing, you're like, I want to do that job. And that's where you get a higher conversion of applicants in that talent acquisition. So, we see a lot of personalization in the video content. It's not just an about us video anymore. It's not a culture video. It is in the trenches of each of these roles and what makes them great, what's the value, what's the proposition, how did they get there, why they want to be there, and what's their long-term play.
Alisa, I think you were telling me earlier about a really good idea that you and Chad were working on, like a sort of, we Ron, for your and for our audience's benefit, we currently are working with some people. We have a Vimeo interactive, an interactive video sort of program that lets us sort of build out that kind of personalization and just sort of essentially like pathways of like choose your own adventure type of thing. And you were telling me about something interesting we were trying to do with that in relation to talent acquisition. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, it's not fleshed out. It's just a big, hairy idea that I have, but it would be amazing if we could set up an organization in an onboarding phase where it's an interactive video where you can interactively choose your own adventure. If you're in a career track, you want to learn about the organization. Let's talk about mission, vision, and values. And then you can move over to like, well, I want to work in the accounting department. So let's go over to accounting and see what they have to offer. And maybe it's an internship program that you see and you were like, oh, I want to be an intern. Or, I'm an entry-level accountant. I just graduated. What does that job career track look like in this organization?
Love that idea. Love that idea.
It is an immersive experience where we take all of these separate videos that every department is making and we make it into this one experience. And this experience is like a career hub of some sort that would be, tactical for the organization and it's easy to update, right? You build the system and then you just keep adapting to how you grow, which allows all of your, workforce and your talent to be able to be a part of your journey, back to Ron's point, from the beginning all the way to retirement.
Absolutely.
I think that's powerful.
I love that idea.
Yeah. And it's funny, and you think about one of the trends that we haven't mentioned yet is this idea that brands are looking for diversity of experience, diversity of thinking, diversity in their own organizations. And this kind of personalized journey becomes a really powerful tool to get folks to envision themselves in your workplace. I think that's tremendous. Tremendous, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Is why I wanted to make sure.
So like that's my big idea. But I was like, we can build it, and if we use it like an organization, we can use any of our organizations to build it and just figure out like where's the most important. And the idea came from because we work with an intelligence agency, and they have constant videos about the career, day in the lives, what it takes, descriptions of the role. Different language tests that they have to take, but they're all just, even when I go on their career page, I still can't find all the videos. So they're somewhere during a journey that isn't actually accessible, right, to the workforce that they're trying to attract. So if you were able to funnel everybody into the same hub, they can then either self-select in or self-select out, knowing that right away. And that is a low cost to every organization to filter attrition so that you're not spending thousands and thousands of dollars working applicants through a process that you find at the end they're just not the right fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sort of a modern day version of, bring your parent to the classroom, right? But I think it's awesome because, listen, I talked about this idea of having a long-term play, right? A life cycle in your pipeline. And I think I can see this as a way to kind of expose students at the middle school level and their parents, by the way, who are very influential on their future career choices or tracks, and teachers, to the possibility of what's out there and how it's changing. And that the truth, by the time they get past high school, many of those jobs will go away and will be completely changed into new roles.
Yeah.
And so opening their eyes up to the possibility, the spectrum of possibility is pretty cool. You know, I've heard of, of new roles in astrobotanists, right? The idea that we're going to need folks who understand botany and other planets. So that's the possibility. And then in high school, having them kind of interact with those possibilities through some kind of job training or workplace involvement, and then something more formal afterwards. So you can see how that can play out and how this particular like personalization becomes a powerful tool for it.
It would be a game changer.
Absolutely. In terms of, so obviously we've got that idea that we're, fuzzing about with and things like that. But of course there are other ways that that a private, even private sector or government can like find ways to humanize the jobs that they do and focus on that, kind of keep it from being like, kind of like, I guess, keep it from being a job and make it more like, I guess, feeling like a life choice, I guess. And so I want to talk about like how the methodologies that we can use to try and like make jobs and careers feel more appealing, feel more like they're part of a person's life and less like the thing that they do for work, just like the place they go to make money. So like, what do you guys think about that?
I'll jump in and simply say that I am not someone who will tell you or will ever espouse the idea of follow your passion. If I ever get invited to a commencement, I will not be saying that. I think, and people on my staff, abuse me for that. But I do think there's something equally powerful in doing what you're really good at, right? And finding validation in that, and through that, kind of living the life you want to live. Now, along with that, you want to find a place, and as an organization, you want to find people who align with the values that you have. Yeah, absolutely, get that. But I think the focus has to be less about passion and more about doing something well, because there is great fulfillment in life in doing something well, being expert, being a master of a skill or topical domain.
That's actually a really interesting perspective. I kind of like that a lot. I think you're right a lot in that. I think also I feel like people following their passions often leads to losing your passion, but doing something you're good at, that's a different feeling. I think that's interesting. Alisa, did you have any?
I think Ron is spot on. Although I have to kind of caveat the passion a little bit, because sometimes even in a creative space, right, you do it, it's not a glamorous, being on set for 10, 12 hours a day is not glamorous. Nobody's like, I'm really good at that, I'm going to do 12 hours a day, 10 days in a row, because you are going to be toast. It's a very manual job. So some of those in the creative space, passion is what drives creativity sometimes, and creativity in that earned for constantly figuring out a different way of doing something. Or I think what fuels you from a creative perspective, it does include passion, but I think it also includes you wanting to always go above and beyond the last thing you do, because creatives don't always want to create the same thing over and over again. So they need to find that burning desire to completely change the world in order for that to be, but they're not doing it for high-paying salaries. They're not out there saying, you need to pay me $3,000. Well, some do, but then they, that is what it is. But so I do caveat it. Whereas from the creative side of things, sometimes passion puts us in a space where we give clients more than they should because we couldn't help ourselves. We were like, you have to have this creative because it's so good.
I definitely think there's space in that both places. I think for sure passion is part of it. But I think, I agree with both of you. I think you're both right, which is the same.
Hey, it's good to have different perspectives on it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Ron didn't hear that before. Which is like he said, my staff may kick me for this.
Absolutely.
This is going to be a hard left turn, I think, because we weren't talking about it before, but we did mention this before we started recording, which is stuff like social media, which is a big part of our current world. Though I think, well, discussing it before, I think all of us were sort of in agreement that in terms of job acquisition, like talent acquisition, not as useful, but it is a part of the world we live in. So what are your thoughts on the utilization of social media in sort of how you cultivate talent and things like that, and like how can the private sector and the government sector work within social media, or how should they even ignore it? I'm not sure. Like, what your thoughts on that?
Ronald, I'll let you go. I have a
I'll
love-hate
jump in.
relationship with social media.
Yeah.
As do I. But I would say that, broadly speaking, social media allows you to kind of, as you do in your consumer audiences, right? It's to talk about the brand and the values and, the products and services you bring to market that have real societal value. And I think it's a way to kind of tell your story. It's a powerful way to tell you, which is why I think video, by the way, does a great job. But I also think there are specific channels like LinkedIn that are really powerful. And I would say even specifically powerful for the main employer in the nation's capital, right? The federal government, because you have many government officials who are in LinkedIn. It's a great space for them to get a sense of what the mission of the organization is about, to get a sense of who's part of the organization. You can go through, and as many do, and research who's there in your age group. Any number of things can be kind of identified, and prospective candidates do a lot of research, and so it's a good way to kind of to organize the way you're portrayed to that audience that you're targeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think to Ron's point about the research and education, a lot of folks out there are using it as a tool to understand technology, media, education. They're getting their news from it, whether it's true or not. I think the gap for me with social media is that it plays well for the business to consumer side of things because you can do a lot of e-commerce point of sale. I don't know the benefit outcomes to a larger organization in terms of data and what folks are actually getting from it. My biggest challenge with social media is that there's just so much content, so much of it at all times that it just becomes cluttered. And you have organizations who haven't done it before trying to get into the game thinking it's going to be their new path. But it'll take you 10 years to get that much content back up on there. And does all that content matter? Because when you actually think about the content, is it telling a story? Is it validating your brand? Is it talking to the right people? Or is it just like, here's another picture. I hope you engage in it. And it becomes that type of like weird conversation where you're trying to decide big executive decisions based on the data of social media, but I'm not sure how valid it is. And I only say that based on my experience with the work that we're doing. And we do a lot of strategic work with clients to convince them not to do certain videos on social media because it will fall flat. But they are just seeing what other people are doing and using that as their guidance, and they want it. And then they say, oh, nobody looked at it. I said, I know, because it's going to fall flat. So that is a huge, huge challenge. So I am all on Camp Ron and LinkedIn because I do feel from a professional level, the gap between social media from like, say, Facebook or Instagram seems to be very social in terms of just kind of the imagery and the content that's going out. But LinkedIn has a little different gravitas from a professional perspective that you see a lot more higher intelligent and more business strategic content, which I believe folks are yearning for so that they can better themselves, better their organization, and strategically grow to the next level. I don't know anybody strategically growing off of Facebook, to be honest, for me.
I think you got to see like an integrated campaign as you would any other marketing campaign, right? Where social media has a role to play. What that role is, you got to define for your organization. But I think in an overall integrated marketing campaign, where you're trying to tell a story through kind of a surround sound field, right, where they're hearing the right messaging about you as an employer, you as an organization, it probably has a role, as it does most things. So I think that's how I would approach social media as a tool in this regard.
Yeah.
By the way, I would say that there's a more specific role for, I would say, groups, wherever groups or targeted communities can be formed and cultivated. So that's LinkedIn or Facebook. There probably is an opportunity there, and which is why in many cases we have a prize challenge, right? And using it as at least partly as a talent acquisition campaign, where we tend to build a small selective community around it and cultivate it, because that becomes a powerful way to build the networking that they're looking for, but also for you to see how they interact with one another, see how they're viewed, right? So it becomes a really powerful engagement tool. So there, I think, whether that's a private virtual community or a selective community as part of a public social media application, there's an opportunity there that I think is a little more unique and different from advertising or throwing up a video saying, "Hey, Uncle Sam needs you."
Yeah. And to Ron's point, which is really great in terms of the community engagement, it needs to be continuous. It can't just be, here's 6 months of content. I hope it has to be continuous. And I do find that organizations find that challenging. If you don't have the right resources and the right staff to be able to constantly see understanding the community, what they want, what they don't want, the data, what's engaging, what's not, then, it's a hard play in your marketing if you're not going to make it a long-term effect.
Community cultivation definitely is a skill that needs to be mastered. And I say that because we've devoted a lot of time and invested a lot of time to doing exactly that. I think it's something that organizations can acquire. May decide not to, but they can probably find a partner that can do it on their behalf.
Rel, we're kind of, I didn't really look at the time, but I think we're a little over, so I won't push us too
We're having
far.
so much fun.
Yeah. I have more.
I told you we would have a lot to say.
I have so many more questions. Unfortunately, I don't think we really have time to get to it. So I'll go ahead and let us say, we'll start with Ron first as our guest. Is there anything that you want our listenership to know about talent acquisition and recruitment and marketing, video content, etc.? Just like, what should they know about it? Like what should they take away from this podcast, if anything?
I think if it's one thing, it's what Alisa began the podcast with, and the idea that talent acquisition is really a strategic play. You've got to think long term. You got to think cultivation of that talent over time, and using the tools to do that over time. So I think that's what I would leave on. Is it is fundamentally strategic. It's not going to go away as a challenge over the next 10 years. And so it's better now to begin thinking about long-term, how do you become more effective? How do you win in a very competitive marketplace? And how do you overcome some of the challenges of the new workforce and the new workplace of distributed employees, of having a need for hard and soft skills that are becoming hard to find? All of these issues are things that need to be answered, and it's time to get serious about it.
Yeah.
Alisa?
Yeah, 100% agree. The one thing that comes to mind for me is audience development and being able to really, truly understand who you are attracting and what they want and what they want to see. Oftentimes, we have an idea of what we think our talent is going to be, but then we haven't immersed ourselves into their kind of perspective. And so having the ability to be an outside perspective from some organization allows us to really truly present what an audience wants, and that is really, to us, a key of success in talent acquisition, because if you're speaking relevancy and the personalization to your talent, then that builds your brand as a more strategic organization that really cares about the workforce and not just people that are going to come in and work and make you money type of scenario.
Thank you both for being here. This was a very good conversation. I feel like I learned a lot of things. Hopefully our listenership learned a lot of things. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me here today.
Thank you, man. Much appreciated.